I'm here to introduce Brendan Castle, who you can see is the Global Director of Staffing for Google. Brendan has had a career that's taken him from Australia around the world, and graduated in 1998, has worked in a lot of organisations and in a lot of places, and now has a very senior role in Google. So ladies and gentlemen, great pleasure to be here, Brendan Castle.
Appreciate the university bringing us together, and I think that those who have been in the US for a period of time have realised how strong alumni networks have been here, and it's great to see our university actually now being able to capitalise on that and be able to bring us all together and have the conversation. So, thanks so much for having me here. So what I thought I'd do is basically do two things. Talk you through my journey, and you'll see that people who are brought up in Western Sydney and from Australia do get to go around the world and not just go to London and work out of a bar. So I'll talk to you a little about kind of my journey around the world and the leadership kind of attributes. And then I thought I'd take some time to kind of talk about Google and how this company thinks of talent, and cast your mind back to the fact that I spent 16 years in banking before I now only spent 3 years at Google. And so it's a very different transition. So let me kind of take you on that journey. As you heard, I graduated from the university in 1998 with no clue what I wanted to do. What I did know and what I really appreciate about the university, which doesn't get talked about a lot, because I get asked this question, why, University of Wollongong, was that it was one of the only universities that allowed me to tailor my degree. So I did a master's degree, but it was at a time when a lot of the courses were being tried and tested. And so rather than just, economics or, management, there was a first year course called Special Topics in Economic Gender. And at that time, there was 35 students, which were 35 females. And so I'm like, I want to give that a go. And so I went to the university and I'm like, what about if I went onto that course? Would, that be part of my degree? And could I just give the other perspective, just because I think it'd be really fascinating to do? And of course, the university completely obliged, said, yep, no problem. And I came away with a distinction because I spent all of the time doing the opposite viewpoint, not because I wanted to be controversial, because I actually wanted to be able to show both sides and have that discussion. At that stage, back in '98, that kind of stuff was unheard of. It was, here's your curriculum, here are the courses you're going to do, and you're going to go in that sequence. And so, when I got asked, even at Google, they asked me the question around the university, that's the answer I gave, is that it allowed me to be me. And so, fast forward, graduated in '98, and I joined Citibank, or CitiGroup as it's known worldwide. Citibank was relatively unknown. In Australia, I'd have to admit, I had no idea who they were or what they did, apart from them being a bank, because I'm from Western Sydney, and unless you're Westpac Commonwealth Bank, you don't exist. And so, so I joined this organisation as a management associate, and essentially it gave me the ability to move around different departments, try different things. Very, very similar programs occur. But what I found really, in my kind of world, what I found was it was still old school personnel management in the HR area. And so I was surrounded by, HR business partners or generalists that essentially thought of the world as they're doing you a service. The infamous kind of payroll people where they walk up and they're all cranky and you're like, grab your money and you run away. And I remember sitting down with the HR head at the time and I'm like, I can't do this. This isn't going to be me. This isn't the world that I wanted to live in. And, and he said to me, what do you want to do? And I'm like, I just want to do stuff and I don't know what. And so he's like, give me an example of something you want to do. And I'm like, I want to build an intranet for the HR department. Yes, I'm aging myself. There was no intranets. There were no internets. This is 1999. And so I did. I went off and I, created this program and, and again, just so my degree is all in HR. I have no coding. I'm not an engineer. I don't make all the big bucks that they all make. But what it enabled me to do is, again, just fun and have, explore and do things. And so what happened was, and you can see the Sydney to Hong Kong, one day we were sitting, in a meeting and CitiGroup had 137 different HR systems. And they decided they wanted to do one. And so, of course, I was maybe 22, 23. The regional HR head was like, who should represent us at, in New York for the entire region? I'm like, totally me. like totally me. I'm thinking New York. And nobody else kind of put themselves forward because everyone's like, it's never going to work, blah, blah, blah. And so I totally came to New York and I represented Asia. And so, and so, you know, and I think one of the funniest stories I have from that kind of version was we were sitting in a room and they were talking about the HR systems and they were talking about, you know, having to have one identifier, one unique identifier. And the powers that be were like, well, social security number. And no one said anything. And I'm like, I was like, we don't all have social security numbers worldwide. And they're like, what? And I thought, okay, it's a revelation, it's going to be amazing. No. He then goes, we're CitiGroup, we'll make everybody have social security numbers. And right then I'm like, oh dear God. I was like, and so, you know, so I traveled back and said, I want to on this project, I want to do this stuff. And so they asked me to move to Hong Kong, you know, and I basically to run the project to implement the one system which I'd never seen before, never used before, and had no technical background. Of course, I said yes. We got married, so my wife and I got married in Coffs Harbour. Why Coffs Harbour? Halfway between Brisbane and Sydney. Let's not do family wars. My wife from Brisbane, me from Sydney. And we flew out the next day, and we landed in Hong Kong. I'd never been to Hong Kong. My wife had never been to Hong Kong. Now we've moved to Hong Kong. So it was fascinating. So, you know, we arrived there, and I spent all of my time basically trying to learn the very system I said that I was going to actually roll out. And so I had to literally like go through and go, what does that button do? Okay, and write it all down before I actually rolled it out to 18 countries across Asia, Korea, Japan. This was going to be me standing in front of them going, totally how to use the system is like this. But one of the attributes, you know, from a leadership point of view that I learned is you've got to get your hands dirty. You've actually got to learn it. The only way to get credibility is if you know more than the people that you're trying to teach. And so I literally spent 7 days a week, overnight, going through and learning this while doing a day job in Hong Kong. It was also my first ever overseas assignment. I had to learn very quickly how to deal with different cultures and be humble enough that I didn't know everything. And what's interesting as you go around the world is, you know, you always say, well, we're Australian, we're direct. It doesn't give you the right to continue to be the direct person. They're not going to say, oh, okay then. It's almost like saying, I don't mean to offend, but, like it doesn't work like that. And so, you know, it was a fascinating 2 years. But then, you know, what I found, and this is one of the kind of key attributes of Google, is a lot of people focus on the launch, not the landing. i.e., it's all about the launch date. Don't worry about what it actually feels like afterwards. Let's just worry about kind of like saying we checked the checkbox and we launched. And so I spent a lot of time during the implementation talking about how we're going to support this. What are we going to do, you know, with regards to, you know, how the employees feel. And these are all these HR systems. And because I was so vocal and putting my hand up, you know, they were like, who's going to be the change manager? I'm like, I'll do it. Never done change, never done communications. Who's going to do the budgeting? Sure, I'll do it. Oh God, now I've got to like learn how to do budgeting. This is all at Citi. And so they then asked me if I'd move to Singapore and head up the HR systems team. And I'm like, totally. Again, no idea what I'm doing with systems. So I ring my wife and I'm like, how do you feel about Singapore? And she's like, yeah, no, nice country. I'm like, no, I'm moving. And she's just like, okay. So we move. She's 7 months pregnant. And so we move and we had our son 3 weeks after we moved. Talk about trying to learn a system really quickly. So we're like, which hospital? That one. You know, but there goes 7 years of, you know, and so I spent 7 years in Singapore. And I initially started learning, you know, and ran the HR systems team. We were so successful in that first implementation, they then asked me to implement a recruiting system, a comp system, a learning system, all of the systems worldwide, which I did. And because we had learnt so much about the processes of the countries, I was then asked to become the regional head of this newly formed shared services function, which was going to essentially take all of the HR administration side of things and actually centralise it under one umbrella, even if it was all the countries. So they came and they sat down and they were like, you know, is this something you're interested in? I'm like, hell yeah, I could totally do this. Never done payroll before. Never done onboarding or offboarding, but why not? Give it a shot. And so soon enough, I had a team of 300 under me. And at that stage, I was 27. Daunting to say the least. And then 2007 hit. And we all remember in the banking industry, financial crisis. Never had a testing like a leadership role when you're doing the financial crisis. So here I am, 27, 28 years old, leading 300 people through one of the worst moments of a company's history. The Citibank stock price dropped from $57 to 97 cents. I had not believed it, so I kept buying it like $20, $18, $15. But it really showed the test of a leader to be able to still, basically focus on your team and have them feel comfortable or confident in how they were feeling. And so therein lies the second kind of area, which is authenticity. There was no way I was going to keep getting up, like many of the bosses at the time kept getting up going, we're okay, we're good. They're just making us take the money. What I did is I stood up and said, you have to do what's right for you. You have to do what's right for your family. We've got to be able to support those people who are being impacted, because my team was responsible for the bonus payouts and the redundancies and the exits. And so you'd imagine the very stress that was being placed on this organization, that not only were they worried about their own jobs and their own stock price and the shares that they were given, they were also exiting people who were just shocked every day to be walking out that building. And so, what the team needed was just somebody to stand up and basically own it, and own that kind of, the authentic leadership that said, I don't know either, but this is the best that we can do. And so it was a major, learning for me as a leader. And we continued, and fortunately, the shared services function expanded rapidly, and a lot more work was coming from us from the US, from the Europe group, as they were looking for cheaper locations to be able to kind of do the business. Not at all smart way to do it, certainly not in 6 months' time as it took, but it really started to play through the stresses of kind of every day. And I think that at that stage, and somewhere in between there, I had a second child, by the way, in Singapore. So now I've got a son and a daughter, and I spent most of my time going, at what stage do I don't keep thinking about work and actually go back to the family side of things? And people talk a lot about work-life balance. And the way that I kind of think about work-life balance is, it's literally the pendulum. It's the ups and the downs. It's sometimes you're going to have to focus on work because you're trying to build your career. Sometimes you want to focus on family because you're trying to build a family. And so what I always tell the team is, what you want to be able to do is just keep flexing between the two depending on what it is, but make sure your significant other is part of that process. And so every decision that was made, it was a conversation that I had with my wife around, this will mean I will have to spend more time at work. Is that something we want to do? And so it was very much connected to kind of like the support mechanisms that are behind you. And so, 7 years in Singapore, and I get a call to go and help Europe, because unlike kind of Asia, we had rebuilt and moved forward. The Europe function of Citibank was still struggling to come to terms with kind of the financial crisis. And so they asked me to move to London and basically head up the shared service function there and keep Asia as well. So I transitioned and became a managing director, one of the youngest managing directors at CitiGroup at 30, which is the highest level you can get in the banking industry, with all this pressure of a 200-year-old bank relying on me to be able to kind of support the payrolls and run the business how it happened. What I learned really quickly is, again, be humble, own it, rather than try and fight against it, and then try and rebuild. So now we're talking about a world of, in Singapore, where it was like weather the storm, to now actually rebuilding a function and rebuilding a team. And so I spent the next 2 years basically rebuilding mistakes that were made because it was so short-sighted to cut and move and offshore and just create just like the worst working environment. And so, when I first entered there, the satisfaction rate, the employee satisfaction rate was 23%. When I ended up leaving to eventually move to New York, it was 94%. And it's because I sat down and went, I get it. Tell me how I can help you. What can I do with you? What do you need? Invest where you need to invest, but be smart about the decisions. And so that kind of took me to London. And because it had worked so well, they asked me then to move to New York and run the global operations. And so, I moved to New York. 3 weeks later, Superstorm Sandy hit, yay. I was in Battery Park City, yay. So we all got relocated. But in typical Australian fashion, like Superstorm Sandy's coming, they're like, evacuate Battery Park City, because that's where obviously I was living. We were all living, and we're looking at going, it's just a storm. Like, geez, like, it's a bit of rain, I'm sure we'll be okay. And then I look out the window, and there's all these Americans with their bags. And I'm like, wife, I think we might want to go. And of course they were like, go to the most central location. I'm like, is that like Central Park? I don't know. So we moved to Central Park. And so, a great welcome to New York. But I spent a good 2 years here running the global operations for Citi. So I had about 1,400 staff. I ran a payroll that was about $19 billion that I had to sign off every month. We did HR transactions of about 2.5 million a month that ran through all across the country, serving about 300,000 people. And it was a lot of responsibility. So then you've got to ask the question, well, why the change? And it was interesting. It was an eventful walk down the Hudson River to my office, which was in Tribeca from home. And every month, what would happen is we would do a 3-hour operations review. Anyone who's been in banking knows that happens all the time. And so it's, this 3-hour review where you just get pummeled with questions about your projects and, compliance and audit always get in there and have a couple of questions. And what I realized on the walk into that is that actually I hadn't even read the presentation. I had no idea what I was going to be talking about in the next, 3 hours, but I wasn't nervous. And so I went, did it, it was easy. And then I realized I didn't have that nervous feeling anymore. Like I didn't have that gut feel that said, I might not know the answer to this. I've got to learn this stuff. And that's where I was like, it's been 15 years. It's time for a change. It's time for something different. And so, it was that kind of eventful moment where I was like, you know what? I'm going to start to answer those calls from the recruiters rather than say, look, I'm happy, leave me alone. I'm actually going to answer the call. And that's when Google called. And so it was a fascinating phone call where, the recruiter rang me up and said, we'd love to kind of have a chat with you. And I was telling some of you that the recruiter had said, like, we'd like to organize a hangout, and I was like, is that like at the pub? I kid you not, he kind of stopped and went, what? I was like, is that like at a pub, like a hangout? And he's like, no, Google Hangouts. I'm like, I don't know what that means. I'm like, I've been in banking, it's like, I have no clue what you're talking about, you're going to hang out. And then I'm like, well, I guess I'm not getting that job anymore. But you know what, a week later, I have this phone call with, my eventual boss, and they asked me to come to Google campus, which is just like entering kind of a university campus. I spent the day meeting with all sorts of people, and I loved it. I had no idea what the job was. They didn't tell me what the job was until the end. It's not typical, but that was how it worked. And it was just a whole other world that gave me that nervousness. What I felt like is that I didn't know the answer. It was, I did everything that they say not to do. I changed industries, companies, locations, and jobs all at the same time. It was like win, win, win. But it was typical me, which is that I don't have any plans. I never have plans. What I want is what's going to excite me next and what's going to challenge me next. And no matter whether you're, an entry-level person or you're a leader, you have to feel that. You have to feel the energy and want to succeed and get nervous. And this was my way of going, I know nothing about this organization and I know nothing about what they do. So that takes me to Google. So that's kind of my journey. 6 cities, 5 countries, 4 continents. As you can tell, we're circumnavigating west. Just have to hit Hawaii and then I'm good to go back to Sydney. And then we kind of continue on. Googlers are asked to constantly say, what if? What if this happens? What if that happens? What if we had a system that could do this? And so part of how we think about the world when it comes to talent and our own team is not only asking the very question, what if, but exploring all sorts of things, getting involved in things that have nothing to do with your day job and everything to do with your day job. So you saw kind of we do Street View where you can go up mountains and you can see kind of the tops of the mountains. It's one of my staff members in Singapore who's a recruiter, 20% of her time is actually climbing mountains and having that on her backpack. Like, how awesome is that? You can do a recruiting job, yet you're using the very thing that makes you passionate to actually give back and to take the photos. So, when you think about, the talent that you're trying to attract or what you're trying to give back, you've got to start to ask yourself, what is it that I'm most passionate about and how do I then bring that into the fold? And so, those great questions have led to all the great products. Giving an example, Gmail, which is obviously widely used now, was a 20% project of somebody who said, there's got to be some better way to do this. And so during standing in line, waiting to get a coffee, there's like, you know what, I'm going to use 20% of my time and I'm just going to create a whole other program that's going to do this. And we'll just use it internally with the team first. And then we're going to use it internally at Google. And then all of a sudden it becomes Gmail. 20% of a project. Or what if we could actually take those really frustrating thermostats that sit on the wall and actually make them user-friendly and easy to do? What does that look like? What if we didn't have to have diabetics take a pinprick every time they wanted to test their blood for sugar, but instead built it into a contact lens that constantly read their sugar and actually told them, time for you to have something to eat before it even happens, which is now, by the way, what's actually happened as part of our company in Verily. You can see that the questions are around what if this, what if that. And so the amazing products that have been developed are basically from team members just recreating their own what ifs and their own scenarios. Googlers are also googly. One of the biggest terms used, but so undefined. What does googly actually mean? It means a whole bunch of things, right? Basically, think of it like this. Do you think about others before you think about yourself? When you're talking and interviewing, are you saying I did this or are you saying we did this? Are you talking about your team or are you talking about yourself? Are you talking about passion and what you really want to change, or are you just trying to give the textbook answers? And so when you think about googliness, you know, and the way that we describe it is it's a passion. It's a passion to say I want to make a difference somewhere. It's a passion that things can be different, or that you just want to support other team members. It doesn't have to be that you've got the next product launching. It has to do with the fact that you want to give back any way possible. And so, you know, the time that we take, and I'll take you through kind of the hiring process, is actually be able to assess that culture fit. And people use culture a lot, and you know, you've got to be a culture fit, and there's always posters on the wall with those pretty little lakes that people go over. And you've all seen them. But you've got to ask yourself, can you actually explain it? Can you explain kind of that feel? And so that's why we've always said googly, as this kind of termed, is different for different people. But what you feel is supported. You know, I spent the first 3 months looking over my shoulder at the company going, what's really behind that meeting? Well, you know, when you walk into a meeting and people are like, well, I've got a bit of feedback. You're like, I bet you do. You want my team, don't you? Like, you know, and you've got that kind of feel. And like 3 months of me sitting there going, when is it really going to happen? Like, when is someone really going to show their true colors? But the whole point of googliness is that there is no true colors. They actually do want to help. They actually don't want to kind of take over your world. And I think that makes a huge difference, because it takes away the pressure of thinking that people are only out there to do the selfish things for them. And so that's when we're kind of looking at talent and we're looking at candidates, they're the conversations we're having. We're not we're not looking for, you know, all these amazing kind of areas. What we're looking for is like, what makes you distinctive? And I was, you know, telling we just recently hired somebody that had a pretty low GPA, or, you know, average score. Most of you will know the GPA being in the US. But you know what? It was because they had to look after a sick family member. And so they finished the degree in 6 years, not 3 years. Isn't that leadership? Isn't that googly? And so the fact that they can still answer the questions that we're asking, who cares what's on the bit of paper? What we care about is the fact that you're able to finish your degree while that was happening. That is a big deal for us. And so, you know, when you think about kind of, you know, what you see in the stories, you know, about Google, and, you know, and you hear it, right, it's harder to get into Google than Harvard. The difference between the two is that the pass-through rates are just an outcome of how many people apply. So of course everybody's wanting to join, and so we get 3 million applications a year. We don't have that many jobs. So it's not that it's harder. We didn't say we have a top 2%. It's just a figment of how many people are applying, and everybody then does the math and then says it's harder to get into. If we could halve the applications, then of course, you know, the pass-through rate or the offers would actually go up. But we don't want to do that, because we want people to engage with Google and know that it's a process of, we'll eventually find the right job. It's just going to take a while. And so, you know, a lot of the times we get a lot of feedback about the hiring process is slow. It's designed to be slow. It's not a quick thing. It's not, let's fill the role in 2 weeks. That's not how we work. We don't ever do the time to hire metric. We don't measure against that, and we certainly don't pressure our team to be able to make that decision. The other thing we talk about is that we want a great place to work. You want to have fun. You want to enjoy. You want to be able to, you know that you've got all these different fun, you know, stories and connection points. You know, Gilly's going to learn on Friday that we have a cricket team. Actually, we have 12 cricket teams. We also have a cricket pitch, because you know what? There's a need there. We have Indians, Australians, British people. They all want that, so why not create it for them? And so, you know, the idea is that we want people to be happy, healthy, and feel like they can actually have a say. And so recently, you know, I told my boss, I'm like, you know, I keep hearing about this machine learning stuff. I was like, I want to do that. I want to get into that. You know, I'll do it from the staffing side. He doesn't say no. It's like, yeah, okay, go for it. And I'm like, okay, now I've got to work out what the hell that means. But yeah, you know, sounds exciting. So when we talk about kind of what we look for in talent, it's pretty much broken down into 4 major areas. Cognitive ability. What is that? Cognitive ability is, what's your logic when it comes to solving a problem? How do you think about things? You would have heard, you know, brain teaser questions that were out there with regards to how many window washers would you need to wash all of the windows in Seattle? And of course everybody's like, that's, you know, ridiculous. It's got nothing to do with that. What we want to understand, and what we were using it for, is your logic. You know, do you then think of shapes and numbers, and, you know, how do you actually deduce how you would even solve that? That's the right conversation. It's not the answer. God knows. My answer to it was I'd just Google it. I don't know. Like, that was my answer. I was like, I'd Google it, and they laughed and went, okay. And so, you know, that cognitive ability, the reason why that becomes so key is because when we're recruiting, we're actually not recruiting for that role. What we're recruiting for is the second and third and the fourth role. Can you move around the organization? Can you evolve and adapt with an organization that is going to continue to change? We were a search engine before. Now we have all those products. Now we're driverless cars. Now we're like in health sciences, machine learning. That's not search anymore. And so if you don't have a population in your organization that can evolve with the company and move around and change and be different, then you're going to quickly run out of talent in your organization and constantly have to bring in new talent. That's not what we want the organization. Role-related knowledge, so RRK is basically just can you do the job, that we're talking to you about. And so the conversations we're having, or if you're in the engineering world, it's can you code? Like what languages can you code in? If you're in the people operations or HR department, it's if you're going to be a recruiter, have you recruited before? How would you think about recruiting from campus? We would pose questions like, okay, you're going to go to the University of Wollongong and you want to hire a whole bunch of people in the hardware product that we've never launched before in Australia. How do you do that? How do you get people excited? How would you assess for that? So they're the role-related knowledge. Leadership's a big one, and leadership is not what people would term and think about as being leaders of the universe and masters of the universe. It's, did you lead projects? Did you lead initiatives? Did you take the front on it? How did you work on that? What if somebody disagreed with you? How did you deal with that? How did you make sure that they were brought back in? So a lot of the conversations that we have, and these questions go right across from graduate level all the way up, it's all about how people deal with the authenticity of being a leader. Are you approachable? Are you authentic? Can you connect? And then we talked about googliness. So we do check for googliness, but we also check for things like, what was the receptionist's name that you met with? Do you know how they are? Do we talk to them afterwards? Without a doubt. How did they treat you? Did they treat you like you were like nothing? Or did they actually like smile and nod and say hello? Big deal for us, because ultimately we want to know that the inner you is not the 45-minute interviews over 4 hours that actually plays out the kind of person that you can pretend to be as opposed to are. And so we do a lot of those kind of conversations. The bottom, the reason why I wanted to kind of lay that out is, unlike many companies, our process is very structured but also very independent. So very rarely will the department or the manager that you will be joining will be part of that process. They may be at the initial, they may have the conversation with you, but then they get completely removed out of it because we don't want many people. We want people for Google, not for the manager. And so apart from, so we do the screens where the recruiting team would obviously make sure that you meet the minimum qualifications. And then typically on an engineering side of things, we'll have a phone interview where engineers, and it's typical engineers, right? It's not, let's all chat about your life story. It's, how do you code in this? What do you think about that? So it's very coding related, very technical. And then you come on to on-site interviews. And the phone interview and on-site interviews are random people across Google that have nothing to do with the area that you're coming into. And so the people that we select are basically, we've already been trained and we use a rubric system, which means that the questions and answers are pretty much defined so we can make sure we've got consistency. But my team is selecting the best people based on that role to then interview you. Separate completely, so you probably never see them again, apart from maybe if you go to one of the events and you might see them, but it's very independent. Once you've passed that on-site interview, you're going to a separate hiring committee. And that hiring committee, again, completely independent of the first group, is basically assessing for, did we ask the right questions? Were we consistent across the board? Is this someone that we would want to bring into the organization? At what level do we want to bring them in at the organization? Again, a completely independent group of senior people doing the review before we then move to offer. So you can see that it's a very structured but also purposeful, not quick process, because we want to make sure that there's independence. And at the end of it, we're then going back to the hiring manager and say, congratulations, we're moving ahead with an offer. And so you can imagine just, one, people coming from the outside as a hiring manager, you're losing all control. You've got to rely on, the staffing function, the interviewers, the write-ups, the committee reviews to ensure that they're delivering you back awesome candidates. And that's, basically how we kind of lay through. We also, I talked a little bit about what, with leadership, and I want to kind of just quickly touch on these areas. So Google is a firm believer that you can measure management and leadership, and more so we can actually ensure that we're doing a feedback mechanism. And so after years of research, the organization came up with these 8 attributes that we believe are pivotal to becoming a great manager in the organization. And so you can see that, good coach, empowers the team and doesn't micromanage. This is a big cultural shift when you come into the organization, because what you'll find is that there is no hierarchy when it comes to communication. My team will meet directly with, my senior people or any senior people without me being involved or even knowing about it. My team spend more time with Larry and Sergey than what I do, purely because they're the subject matter experts. And people don't want the manager, they want people who know what they're doing. And so you've got to be okay as a leader being able to just say, how can I help you? What do you need? And that's it. Not make sure I'm in the meeting, copy me in on the email. Doesn't happen. Expresses interest, concern for team members' success and personal well-being. Remember I talked about the googliness side. Does your manager actually care? Are they worried about what's happening? When we've got weather patterns that are coming up the coast of the US, first thing we're reaching out to our teams in New York going, go home if you need to. How's your family? What do you need? That's the kind of conversations. I was in the Google office today and that's all I was talking about. Anyone concerned? Do we have any issues? What do you need? That is how we think about it, not how will the work get done? Like, are we closing the office? Should we close the office? That's not part of the conversation. Managers need to be productive and results oriented. Let's not think that it's just a playground. We've got a job to do. We've still got to deliver product. I've still got to be able to meet the demand of that business, because if my team doesn't succeed in being able to find the candidates, we can't launch the products. And so, we've still got to make sure that the team is productive and is able to execute against that. Is a good communicator. A good communicator does not mean extroverted. A good communicator means authenticity. You're actually connecting with the team and you're actually hearing them. And so one of the things we talk a lot about is how do you use your own personality style? How do you use your own forums to be able to connect with your team? And so how are you, are you walking through the floors? Are you doing team events? Like, what are you doing to make sure that the team feel that they know what's going on? You would have probably heard, those of you who have heard it before, that the founders of the company 20 years later are still meeting every week with us, and the entire company gets together on Thursdays and they share with us everything that's going on. It's a very trusting organization. So we know all the products that are coming up and we trust that the employees won't leak that externally, but you know it ahead of everybody else. And that still goes on today. 70,000 employees still connecting once a week to be able to hear what the founders are actually working on and what their ideas are. Helps with the career development. We spend a lot of time, typically with regards to like, what does the career development look like? And you can put that on a poster, right? I'm really good at career development. We're actually asking your team members, when was the last time they had a conversation with you? Did they talk to you about external roles? Did they talk to you about like out of the, when did they ask about your passion? That's the kind of questions that we're asking employees to make sure that managers feel on the hook to have the right conversations. Has a clear vision and strategy of the team. The team just needs to know what they're there for and why they're contributing. Again, it doesn't have to be some fancy mission statement or vision statement. My vision for the staffing organization is really simple, which is that we have to find the best talent because they're the ones that are going to launch the amazing products that you see every week get launched. It's as simple as that. So the whole thing is don't let things stop you getting the best talent. And there's important technical skills that help advise the team. So you have to be able to bring something to the organization that can value add. And so like if you think about the staffing organization, I'm not a recruiter, like at all, never had the back. So I can't turn around and go, I have technical skills to address that. But what I have got is running a large organization globally. So my technical skills and being able to connect people is saying, okay, why don't we get the New York team to actually help the London team and actually connect all of that? Why don't you have you move around and think of it much more like a business? And so my value add to this organization is not a recruiter or how to recruit or how to use LinkedIn to find people. My job is to say, think about it completely differently and let me take the risk. You want to do something completely different? Do it. And so, that's where they're looking for me to kind of play out. So that's just a bit of an insight into kind of like my world, how I kind of moved around, Google and what we're looking for.